For anybody who's loved cars for some time now, one of the hardest things to wrap your head around is the current prevalence of million-dollar or multi-million-dollar cars. Consider that just 10 or 15 years ago, there were only 2,000 or less million-dollar cars on Earth. And today, there's well over 100,000. We might be approaching 250,000 cars with more than $1 million in value. Now, that's a very, very strange thing, but of course, in that decade or so, a lot of interesting things have happened economically. But what that really means that in just about every major city in the world, there's probably a secret warehouse or 10 that has a bunch of million-dollar cars in it. And a few weeks ago, I found myself in just one of these warehouses in metropolitan Las Vegas. I'd traveled out there to build some content with our current sponsor, Glossit. And they wanted to do some stuff to promote their newest offer that we've been talking about now for a few weeks. Their DIY ceramic coating package is the best one we've ever offered. You get their $200 graphene ceramic coating along with a $50 bottle of their ceramic detail spray, which makes the application and the removal of the ceramic coating a whole lot easier, achieving a much better outcome, even for an idiot like me in my own garage. You get all that if you click the link in the description below right now for just $69.99. Glossit's amazing, their products are amazing, and this idea was pretty interesting because I was going out there primarily to see a 2014 Ferrari LaFerrari. Now, Rich from Glossit had been here last year to tell the real story of this car, and we kind of thought that was going to be the end, and I told the story again of what exactly happened when I went out there. We took this LaFerrari back to the Wynn Hotel, showed it to the valets, and this was, of course, the car that had lost Steve Wynn and Roger Penske's Ferrari franchise at the Wynn Hotel. But when I show up at this warehouse, certainly there is a LaFerrari, but there's also every other amazing hypercar there. He's got the P1, he's got a 918, he's got the new 4 GT, which I don't know if I'd call that a hypercar, but I would say an XJ220 with a V6 was a hypercar, so perhaps. He's got a Koenigsegg Regera, and tucked over there in the corner is a Pagani Huayra BC Roadster, one of the most recent cars that he's acquired. He's also got a Bugatti Chiron, he's got another one on the way, he's got a Pagani C10 on the way. He is now just buying all these cars. And he's a pretty secretive guy, but you can follow him on Instagram to see all of his interesting cars at MyRides63. So check him out, but as we're in there talking to this guy, he's super down to earth, super interesting, and honestly, he just loves cars. And the reason that he loves Rich so much in Glossit is that he really does love to drive his cars. He lets Rich obviously cover every surface in PPF and then ceramic coat it so they're easy to clean and they stay looking great, and then he puts a lot of miles on them. So he was going to be driving the LaFerrari a lot. It had just gotten there. Rich was in the process of now PPFing his P1 so that he can start to put a lot of miles on it, but he had just taken delivery of this Huayra BC Roadster on the Pagani Roduno, their rally that they do. And I have to say that I've always been somewhat fascinated by who Pagani is, obviously Horacio as a person, but what he's done with his company. And the craftsmanship in the cars is obviously phenomenal. I'd been on rallies with Randy from Savage Garage, who was obviously sorely missed in his Huayra, and watching him drive that car was super duper cool. But I had never really been behind the wheel of one. I'd sat in a couple of them, and that's what you immediately appreciate about a Huayra is obviously the craftsmanship. Looking back on the Zonda's manual transmission, mid-engine V12 cars, obviously a lot of the Mercy inspiration. They use a lot of shared parts, even with the air conditioning and things like that, with a Mercy, and so I really, really like those as well. But I didn't immediately love the design of the Huayra when I saw it. Now, everything they've done through the evolution of the model, obviously culminating in the BC cars, is phenomenal. And having Randy Pope sit right here and talk about that car really in comparison to what they call the hypercar Holy Trinity of 2013-14 in the 918 P1 and LaFerrari, I thought was pretty fascinating because having driven all of them back-to-back at Hypercar Invitational, he was able to truly and sincerely sing the praises of the Huayra BC. And he also talked about how much better it was as an evolution of the regular Huayra platform. And so as we're looking around and we're planning to take the LaFerrari out and obviously take it out to Red Rocks and then go over to the Wynn, he mentions, if there's any other cars you guys want to take out, feel free to ask. Now, I spent a whole lot of time in my late teenage years conning car dealers into letting me test drive cars. But today, I really don't like driving other people's cars. I mean, I love driving all cars, but to me, there is really that romantic ownership idea now that I can have one or a few of them, depending on how broken they are. And so I really only approach cars with the intent to buy it. I am not in the market for what I found out was an over $5 million at MSRP Huayra BC Roadster that he had spec'd out over years and years of a relationship with Pagani and the factory and everything like that. And he'd had several Huayras before it, but this was really like his ultimate manifestation of what he wanted his Pagani to be. So I saw that car and I was like, look, I'm not usually one to ask to drive anybody's cars. In fact, the only time in the last 5 years I can remember ever doing that was asking John Tamarian if I could come down and drive his 2008 Koenigsegg CCX that he had in inventory at Curated. And that was one that honestly I thought might be the ultimate car. A manual transmission, super cool door, ultra low production. I think there's 12 US legal CCX cars that are manual. I wanted to drive it. So I traveled to drive that car, and that was the only real time I could remember asking somebody. But given the opportunity, I was going to take that alley-oop and say, yes, please, can we take out your Pagani? And he immediately said, absolutely. And so we pull out the car into the sun, and I have to say, as great as it looked, perfectly clean and in his warehouse, as you really saw the lines and the light moving over it and the quality of the way the car was built, it's just unlike anything else. And again, that's what you hear about Paganis, is that you'll never see anything that has the same attention to detail, the same quality of materials, the same obvious craftsmanship that goes into building a hypercar. Now, the interesting thing about the Pagani from like a performance perspective is that a lot of it is outsourced. And the early Koenigsegg's were sort of similar, but they ended up with a little bit of kind of a kit car feel, to be quite honest. I know it's evolved and the Agera series are much higher quality, but some of the early cars were really like a, purpose-built race car that you were allowed to drive on the street. They weren't as cohesive in terms of the ways that they were built. Now, the AMG power plant, the 6-liter V12 twin turbo that's in the Huayra, is really, really special because of how great it is in all of the AMG products that it's been in. It's essentially the same engine that I had in a 2007 S65 AMG. And it makes great power, and we've always seen Rentec and the other tuners take them up to 750 horsepower and 1,000 pound-feet of torque and things like that. But in the Huayra's form, with about 3,000 pounds of curb weight, due to the extensive use of carbon fiber, the car makes about 791 horsepower, which is obviously a bit behind some of the competitors that are all hybrid assist, but I very much prefer that it is not electrically assisted in the way that it delivers power. And so I was excited for the chance to drive it and feel what it was really like. Now, also different than most supercars and hypercars of today, the Huayra still uses a single-clutch sequential manual transmission, much like my Mercy SV or my 430 Scuderia. And so I was interested to see how they had executed on that. I know Randy had had some issues with his on his Huayra, and so, it's not the most technologically advanced. It is not the most smooth and drivable, but it is reasonably a reliable setup, and it's pretty simple mechanically in the way that it works. We've been using these in sports cars since the 1997 Ferrari 355 F1. So now the paddle shift cars are obviously much more popular. Manual cars, unfortunately, are becoming a thing of the past, and so this is where we're at, but really this is 10 to 15 years ago in terms of technology. And so he pulls it out, he drives it for a bit, and then lets me get behind the wheel. And of course, we're on the Vegas highways. They're really high quality, nice big visibility. But the comfort of the car, the room, the visibility is all excellent. And I have to say, just the feeling of being in there, seeing how many times different craftsmen and different people had paid attention to each surface and each part, each little piece, it was really, really phenomenal. Now, I'll say that in the context of like a fire-breathing hypercar, that engine is a bit of a letdown. It's got, I think, about a 6,000 RPM redline, different than a lot of the similar cars that are running up to 8,500 or 9,000 RPM. Of course, the fact that it's twin turbocharged means that it's not as immediately responsive as, say, a naturally aspirated V12 and a Mercy. But I would say that in gear, the feeling of just driving the car around on a highway, if you're not at full bore revving to redline, is generally pretty similar to a Mercy. It's 150 more horsepower or so than a 640 or 670 or whatever. But at the end of the day, it felt very, very similar. Very stiff, phenomenally so. Not in a punishing way, but just in a way that you really appreciate that this is a properly built car. And of course, I've never even entertained the idea of owning what people would call a hypercar. I've talked a lot about setting the goal of owning a Bugatti because after owning my dream car in the manual LP640 and now having 3 Mercedes, I feel like it's always nice to keep me motivated to have a goal out there. I still remain not necessarily sure that that's the most responsible thing, but I had really never thought about would I like to own a Pagani. But again, I try to take this very romantic approach to cars that I like to look at cars that I think I will drive a lot, own for a long time. Now, of course, I don't have a great track record of owning cars for a very long time, but this, seemed like the kind of car that you might never be able to top. I mean, really, in terms of how cars were going to be allowed to be built and allowed to be introduced. I mean, obviously, every leading edge is both sharp and carbon fiber. Not a very crashable car, but awesome to see what the brand has done. And so I can't thank MyRide63 enough for letting me drive the car. I did love the experience. I don't know that it's my personal halo car, but it's so cool as an enthusiast to be able to experience not just cars like that, but much more significantly, owners like that are so passionate about actually putting miles on their cars. And so again, thanks for the opportunity to Rich and his team at Glossit, and thank you for their current offer in their DIY ceramic coating kit. Again, click the link in the description below, and for just $69.99, you're gonna get their $200 graphene ceramic coating and their $50 bottle of ceramic detail spray to make DIY application easier than ever. So check it out now to thank them for their support of VINwiki.